By the 1860s, soldiers on both sides of the American Civil War already had access to a rifle that could fire multiple rounds without reloading, carry more ammunition than anything else on the battlefield, and put a trained soldier's rate of fire so far ahead of his opponents that it bordered on unfair. The technology worked, the combat record was real. And when the war ended and armies around the world began deciding what their standard infantry rifle should look like for the next generation, almost none of them chose it. They went with something slower, something that held fewer rounds, something that required manual operation between every single shot. Understanding why that decision wasn't insane, why it was actually correct, requires understanding something about what armies actually needed from a rifle that has almost nothing to do with how fast it could fire. The lever-action rifle's appeal was obvious and immediate. Work the lever, chamber a round, fire. Work it again. A trained shooter could maintain a rate of fire that left bolt-action competitors standing still by comparison. The tubular magazine running beneath the barrel held anywhere from 7 to 15 rounds, depending on the variant. In a close-range engagement, against an enemy still loading single shots with a ramrod, a lever-action rifle was a completely different category of weapon. Cavalry units recognized this instantly. Frontier fighters understood it. The problem was that cavalry skirmishes and frontier encounters were not the engagements that military planners were designing rifles for, and the moment you started looking at the lever action through the lens of sustained infantry combat across open terrain, almost every advantage it appeared to have started developing complications. Start with the mechanics. Lever-action rifles have significant moving parts exposed along the bottom of the receiver, the lever itself, the linkages, the loading gate. In a gun shop or a demonstration range, this is irrelevant. On a campaign, soldiers drop rifles, drag them through mud, bang them against equipment, and operate them in conditions that would ruin a precision instrument in an afternoon. Bolt-action designs kept their critical mechanisms more enclosed and more protected. They handled sustained rough treatment better, and armies that had watched entire campaigns destroy equipment that worked perfectly in testing had learned to weight durability heavily in any procurement decision. A rifle that performed brilliantly in a demonstration but jammed in the fourth week of an advance was worth less than a rifle that performed adequately every single day. The second problem was one that almost nobody raised in the popular debate about lever actions versus bolt actions, and it mattered more than the rate of fire argument. Infantry tactics were changing. By the 1870s and 1880s, soldiers were spending increasing amounts of time on the ground, prone behind cover, using terrain, keeping their bodies as low and as hidden as possible. Lever-action rifles work naturally in an upright position. To cycle the action, the shooter moves the firing hand downward and forward in an arc that disrupts the rifle's position against the shoulder. Standing up or sitting, this is a minor inconvenience. Lying flat behind a rock or a wall with enemy fire coming in, it means either exposing yourself or compromising your shooting position to chamber the next round. Bolt-action rifles allowed a soldier to stay prone, stay behind cover, and work the action with a small movement of the right hand that barely shifted the weapon's point of aim. Then there was the problem hidden inside the lever action's most celebrated feature. The tubular magazine that gave it such impressive capacity required cartridges to sit nose to primer inside a metal tube, meaning the tip of one bullet was resting directly against the primer of the round ahead of it. Under recoil, that arrangement could set off a chain detonation if pointed bullets were used. The solution was flat-nosed or round-nosed ammunition, which solved the safety problem and created a ballistic one. By the 1870s, armies were already moving toward longer-range engagements and the pointed, aerodynamically efficient bullets that made them possible. A rifle whose magazine design physically prevented the use of pointed ammunition was a rifle that couldn't fire the cartridges military planners were building their future doctrine around. The capacity advantage meant nothing if the ammunition it held was the wrong shape for the distances armies expected to fight at. The reloading problem compounded everything. Lever-action rifles loaded through a gate in the side of the receiver, one round at a time, individually, by feel. When the magazine ran empty in the middle of a firefight, the shooter's attention had to come off the target area entirely while they fed cartridges through the gate. This process was slow, awkward under fire, and impossible to rush without risking a fumble that left the rifle completely empty at exactly the wrong moment. Bolt-action rifles, once armies adopted stripper clips, could be replenished in seconds. 5 rounds pressed down into the magazine in a single motion, clip discarded, bolt forward, back in action. The entire process could be done while staying low behind cover, eyes up, without breaking the shooter's awareness of what was in front of him. When armies saw this comparison side by side, the lever action's rate of fire advantage at the start of an engagement looked increasingly irrelevant against the bolt action's advantage in sustained, controlled fire over the course of one. The sustained fire problem pointed towards something deeper that shaped military thinking across the entire second half of the 19th century. Ammunition in a campaign didn't arrive on demand. It travelled by wagon, by pack animal, by rail lines that stopped many miles from where the fighting was actually happening. Once soldiers moved beyond the supply head, every round they carried was finite and irreplaceable until resupply caught up, which might take hours or days. A rifle that encouraged rapid fire was a rifle that encouraged soldiers to burn through their ammunition faster than it could be replaced, and commanders who had watched entire units fight their way through an engagement only to find themselves with empty pouches as the enemy counterattacked had strong feelings about this. Controlled, deliberate fire wasn't just a preference, it was a tactical requirement, and many officers actively wanted a rifle that supported it rather than one that made it easier to fire 3 rounds when one would have done. The lever-action rifle was genuinely impressive. It worked, it was proven in combat and in the right context, close range, mobile fighting, situations where volume of fire mattered more than sustained accuracy. It had real advantages. But standard military rifles didn't live in the right context. They lived in mud and heat and rough handling and 6-week advances and supply lines that broke down. They needed to fire the ammunition armies were developing for long-range accuracy. They needed to be reloaded fast under fire. They needed to work on the ground in the prone position behind cover by a soldier who might not have cleaned his weapon in 3 days. When every one of those requirements went onto the list, the bolt action didn't win because it was faster, or held more rounds, or looked more impressive. It won because it failed at fewer things, and in the business of equipping armies that turned out to be the only metric that actually mattered.